This is MTG Burgeoning, and in this video we are going to showcase an Oathbreaker deck tech with Garruk, Apex Predator as the Oathbreaker, and Finale of Devastation as the signature spell. Thank you for joining us for this Oathbreaker deck tech. Here we have Garruk, Apex Predator as our Oathbreaker. Of course, he is a Planeswalker for 5 and Golgari colors. That's 1 black and 1 green mana. Garruk enters the battlefield with 5 loyalty counters. We can +1 him to destroy another target Planeswalker, which is an exceedingly inordinately powerful ability in the Oathbreaker format. We can also +1 Garruk to create a 3/3 black beast creature token with Death Touch. Death Touch is a feature that we will be showcasing throughout this video. We can take 3 loyalty counters off of Garruk to destroy target creature, and we gain life equal to its toughness. And then lastly, for -8, Garruk's Big Bang ability has target opponent get an emblem with, whenever a creature attacks, it attacks you, it gets +5/+5 and gains trample until end of turn. That could be the death blow to any opponent that is unfortunate enough to receive Garruk's emblem. That is our Oathbreaker, and our signature spell is Finale of Devastation. For X and 2 green, we have a sorcery here that allows us to search our library and or graveyard for a creature card with mana value X or less and put it on to the battlefield. If we search our library this way, we shuffle it. If, for any chance, we pay more than 10, or if we pay 10 or more into X, then creatures we control get +X/+X and gain haste until end of turn. So if you can imagine, by giving one of our opponents Garruk's trampling and +5/+5 emblem, in addition to Finale of Devastation getting 10 or more into X, well, we should be able to win the game soon after if we are fortunate enough to do both of those things. All right, with our Oathbreaker as signature spell showcased, let's turn our attention to the mana base. We're only 2 colors, so there's no big frills or chills here. We're going to have 7 basic swamps to pair with 7 basic forests, and then the rest of our land base is going to be comprised of some non-basic lands that are going to give us our desired colors. We have Command Tower, we have an Overgrown Tomb that we can pay 2 life when it comes into play, so it's not untapped. We have Undergrowth Stadium that will come into play untapped if we have at least 2 opponents. We have a Woodland Cemetery that comes into play untapped as long as we control a swamp or a forest. We have Llanowar Waste, which will tap for a colorless mana, or we'll tap for a black or green and deal 1 damage to us. We have a Tainted Wood that gives us a colorless mana, or we can tap to add a black or green only if we control a swamp. We have Nurturing Peatland, which we can tap, pay 1 life to add a black or a green mana, or we can pay 1 generic mana, tap and sacrifice to draw a card. And the last land in our land base is Blossoming Marsh. This is going to come into play tapped unless we control 2 or fewer lands, and it taps for a black or a green mana. So like I said, no frills, no chills, just a pretty straightforward 2-color mana base for this Golgari Oathbreaker deck. All right, with our land stocked right there next to our signature spell, it is now time to start revealing some of our mana ramp. Luckily, we're in green, so we can play with a couple of great ramp spells that begins with Farseek. Here we can search our library for a plains, island, swamp, or mountain card and put it onto the battlefield tapped, so that we can get any of our swamps, of course, or we can get our shockland. Anything with swamp in the title, Farseek is going to get for us. 3 visits will do the same, except it's going to get a forest card instead, and it does not put it into play tapped. All right, after those ramp spells, we've got some mana rocks here that begin with Arcane Signet. It's going to tap for one of our 2 colors, of course, because it's going to be one of our 2 color identities, one of the 2 colors in our in our Oathbreaker's color identity. Next up, we have a Mind Stone that we can tap for a colorless, or we can pay 1, tap, and sacrifice it to draw a card. And then, of course, we have the requisite Signet and Talisman. Here we're going to tap our Talisman of Resilience for a colorless mana, or we're going to tap it for a black or a green, and then this will deal 1 point of damage to us. This is the artifact version of Llanowar Wastes. Golgari Signet will pay a generic mana into it, turn it sideways to add a green and black mana to our mana pool. Alright, now let's turn our attention to some removal spells. We're going to kick things off with Wilt. It's an instant for 1 and a green that will destroy target artifact or enchantment, or we can pay 2 generic mana to cycle it out of our hand to draw a card. Let's get some of that glare out of there. Alright, that's better. Next we have is Vertis's Maneuver. This sorcery is 2 and a black, and for each player we choose friend or foe. Each friend returns a creature card from their graveyard to their hand. Each foe sacrifices a creature they control. I don't think it's going to be too difficult to make sure that we are friend and our opponents are foes. Next, we have Soul Shatter, same mana value, but this is an instant. Each opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker with the highest converted mana cost among creatures and planeswalkers they control. Hopefully for us, we'll get each opponent to sacrifice their Oathbreakers. Next up, we have an enchantment, Pernicious Deed. This is 1 in Golgari colors, and then we can pay X generic mana into it and sacrifice it to destroy each artifact, creature, and enchantment with converted mana cost of X or less. Noticeably absent from this spell, Planeswalkers. Next up, for some spot removal, we have Vraska's Contempt. This instant is 2 and 2 black mana. We exile target creature or a planeswalker, and we gain 2 life. More often than not, we'll be using this spell to get rid of one of our opponent's Oathbreakers. Another enchantment that we can use here is the Eldest Reborn. This saga comes into play, and with Chapter 1, each opponent will sacrifice a creature or a planeswalker. Again, similar to Soul Shatter, we're hoping to make sure that our opponents are forced to sacrifice their Oathbreakers. When we put the second lore counter onto this saga, each opponent will discard a card, and then when the third and final lore counter goes onto it, not lore saga, lore counter, we put a target creature or planeswalker card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under our control. So some battlefield management, some resource depletion, and some recursion all in one saga. Next up, we're going to beef up our removal with Casualties of War. 2 black, 2 green. We choose one or more of the following: destroy target artifact, destroy target creature, destroy target enchantment, destroy target land, destroy target planeswalker. Most likely going to be the most important here in the Oathbreaker format. We can also cast in Garruk's Wake for 7 and 2 black mana to destroy all creatures we don't control and all planeswalkers we don't control as well. Again, we're looking to get rid of our opponent's Oathbreakers, and casting in Garruk's Wake should leave the battlefield completely tipped in our favor. And last for our removal, we have Finale of Eternity. X and 2 black, we destroy up to 3 target creatures with toughness X or less. And if X is 10 or more, we return all creature cards from our graveyard to the battlefield. Alright, next up we're going to continue our theme of, we're going to go with some graveyard recursion here with Regrowth. Sorcery for 1 and a green, we return target card from our graveyard to our hand. Next up is Rise of the Dark Realms, 7 and 2 black mana. This time we're going to return all creature cards from all graveyards right to our side of the battlefield. After that, we have Green Sun Zenith. It's a sorcery X and a green mana. We search our library for a green creature card with CMC X or less and put it onto the battlefield, and then we shuffle Green Sun Zenith back into our library for the purposes of using it again. Next up, we have Court of Calling. This similar to Green Sun Zenith is not necessarily going to be utilized for recursion because it doesn't get anything from our graveyard, but similar to Green Sun Zenith, it is going to cheat something from our library right into play. Here we're going to pay X and 3 green, but this instant has the Convoke mechanic, which means that our creatures can help us cast this spell. Each creature we tap while casting this spell pays for 1 generic mana or 1 mana of that creature's color. And then we can search our library for a creature card with a mana value of X or less and put it on to the battlefield. Note that that is at instant speed. We're going to include a second planeswalker here in the 58 of this deck, which is Vraska Swarm's Eminence. She comes into play with 5 loyalty counters for 2 and any combination of 2 Golgari hybrid mana, and whenever a creature we control with Death Touch deals damage to a player or planeswalker, we put a +1/+1 counter on that creature. We can take 2 loyalty counters off of Vraska to create a 1/1 black assassin creature token with Death Touch, and whenever this creature deals damage to a planeswalker, destroy that planeswalker. That's going to help us get rid of a whole lot of Oathbreakers here in this format. All right, and lastly, we're going to speed through all of our creatures. Notice our Death Touch trend as we go through each one of our creatures. Here we have Finn the Fangbearer. Whenever a creature we control with Death Touch deals combat damage to a player, that player gets 2 poison counters. This is going to help us have an additional win condition here in a format that could definitely use more and more win conditions. Here we have Dire Fleet Poisoner. It has Flash and Death Touch, and when it enters the battlefield, target attacking pirate we control gets +1/+1 and gains Death Touch until end of turn. Next up, we have the Gifted Aetherborn. It's just a 2/3 Death Touch with lifelink. After that, we have Ronus the Indomitable. Here we have a 5/5 Death Touch with Indestructible. Ronus cannot attack or block unless we control another creature with power 4 or greater. Luckily, it has an activated ability for 2 and a green mana that gives another target creature +2/+0 and trample until end of turn. Next up is the Hooded Blightfang. It's a 1/4 with Death Touch. Whenever a creature we control with Death Touch attacks, each opponent loses 1 life and we gain 1 life. Whenever a creature we control with Death Touch deals damage to a planeswalker, we destroy that planeswalker. Next up, we have Varagoth Bloodsky Sire, another Death Toucher, but this one has the Boast mechanic. So whenever it attacks, we can pay 1 and a black mana to activate its Boast ability to have target players search their library for a card and then put that card on top of their shuffled library. Next, we have the Embodiment of Agonies. It's flying and Death Touch with a 0/0, but it gets a +1/+1 counter for each different mana cost among non-land cards in our graveyard when it enters the battlefield. Grim Dancer is up next. It's a 3/3, and when it comes into play, we choose 2 different counters from among Menace, Death Touch, and Lifelink, and put those counters onto this nightmare. Next, we have this Vampire Nighthawk. It flies, it Death Touches, and it has lifelink. Same thing with the Nighthawk Scavenger, except its power is equal to the number of card types among cards in our opponent's graveyards, +1. After that, we have the Leyline Prowler. It has Death Touch and lifelink, but we can turn it sideways to add 1 mana of any color. Next, we have the Questing Beast. It's a 2 and 2 green mana for a 4/4. It has Vigilance, it has Death Touch, it has Haste. It cannot be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less, so there's no chump blocking this beast. And combat damage that would be dealt by creatures we control cannot be prevented. And whenever Questing Beast deals combat damage to an opponent, it deals that much damage to target planeswalker that opponent controls. Fantastic removal for the Oathbreaker format. Next, we have Gonti, Lord of Luxury, another Death Toucher. When it comes into play, we look at the top 4 cards of target opponent's library. We exile one of them face down and put the rest in the bottom of their library in a random order. We may look at that card and cast it for as long as it remains exiled, and we may spend mana as though it were mana of any type to cast that spell. Little extra card advantage from that Aetherborn Rogue. Next, we have Endling with its host of different abilities. Pay a black, it gains Menace until end of turn. Pay a black, it gains Death Touch until end of turn. Pay a black, it gains Undying until end of turn. Or pay a generic mana to give it +1/-1 or -1/+1 until end of turn. Next, we have the Poison Tip Archer, another Death Toucher, but it also has Reach, and whenever another creature dies, each opponent loses 1 life. Note that's whenever another creature dies, it does not have to be one of ours, and it does not have to be an opponent's. And closing out the creatures and this deck tech today is Acidic Slime, a 2/2 Death Toucher that when it comes into play, we destroy target artifact, enchantment, or land. And there you have it, folks. We have a Golgari Oathbreaker deck with Garruk Apex Predator as our Oathbreaker and Finale of Devastation as our signature spell. And as you notice, we have a very nice very nice sub-theme of Death Touch in this deck. It's going to have to take a lot of opponents' creatures' resources in order to stop them from attacking their Oathbreakers with our creatures, and all we need to do is deal 1 point of damage to them with the many host of abilities we have that say, when this creature with Death Touch deals damage to a Planeswalker, destroy that Planeswalker. There you have it, MTGBC. Let me know your thoughts about this deck tech in the comment section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic.